Welcome, welcome, welcome. Today we're talking about gender and sexuality. So let's dive right into it. So everybody here, this is a 300 level class, which means you've all taken Soc 101 or an equivalent. That doesn't mean you've taken a gender heavy class. And I also know that not all professors talk about gender heavily. So if I say that gender is a social construct, you might not know what that means. However, because you've all taken the prereqs to take this class, I know that you all know what a social construct is. So let's just start there. In your own words, what's a social construct? So gender is socially constructed. The opposite of social construction would be gender essentialism or sexual essentialism. And essentialism is just, essentially men are just essentially stronger. Women are just weaker. Women are just better parents. Men are just better workers. Men are just more aggressive. Women are just more nurturing. Essentialism is the sense that men and women have innate, mutually exclusive differences. However, this is a sociology class, and so we don't really get into essentialism except as a way to push back or except as a pushback. So gender is socially constructed, meaning that everything that we know about gender and understand about gender comes from the social environment. We are socialized into doing gender, so how we perform gender. Gender is both cultural and historical. And so in American society, a man wearing bottoms that only have open bottoms, a skirt, is stigmatized. However, in Ireland, men wear kilts. And so imagine if a man of Irish heritage passed away in America and wore a kilt at his funeral. There wouldn't really be many people who would judge the family for that, or who would say, oh, that person must be trans or must be quote unquote confused. However, if a man was wearing a skirt, same look for the most part, just a different name and a different pattern perhaps, that would be stigmatized. If we think historically, and so if I were to say to you, who wears pink high heels and wigs? You would say women, or maybe you're more progressive and you would just say femmes. However, the color pink, high heels, and wigs were all originally worn and adorned by men as the masculine expressions of gender. And so everything that we understand about gender, favorite colors, favorite way of dressing, all of that is really taught to us by our social environment. Again, a skirt is a no-no, but a kilt is just fine. Today, heels are for women. A few hundred years ago, heels were for men. And if you don't believe me, you can look all this up, I promise. And so what we have is that men and women, these categories are really, 99% the same, which is why even dividing men and women into these two categories doesn't necessarily make statistical sense, because there's over 99% overlap. That 1% of difference between men and women, we stretch it to feel like it's 100% of difference, even though it's not. We stretch the difference. We don't need gendered razors. There's no reason that I should have to pink razors and blue razors, just make them all good. We don't need to have gendered razors. We don't need, I don't know if you guys have seen the dude wipes. And I'm not gonna lie, they smell great or whatever, but there are wipes literally called dude wipes. Why can't they just be called large peppermint wipes? It's very marketable. And if you're like, oh, this sounds interesting, take my social gender class. It's a great time. But the reason why we have female wipes and dude wipes, and I'm not talking about, vulva sensitive wipes, but in the sense of femme presenting wipes and masculine presenting wipes and pink razors and blue razors and pink loofahs and pink and blue loofahs. We have all of this because it's marketable to have these different markets. It's a highly profitable system. But in reality, I can grab any razor for the most part and shave. And if there's a difference, the difference will be in the blades, in the quality of the razor. The color of the razor is never going to make the shave smoother or rougher. Same thing with the wipes. As long as the wipes have chemicals that are not harmful, it doesn't really matter whether they say dude or dudette on them. So we're kind of socialized to believe that these things that these different markets are representative of differences between us, but in all reality, they're not. We create this difference as a society. We baby daughters and we tell sons to man up. We praise girls for passivity, for being nurturing, for being patient, and we praise boys for being independent, stoic, and aggressive. And so as I talk to you later on in this lecture about gender differences in mental health, how women tend to default to being more passive and reflecting inward with their issues, and men tend to act their distress out onto others and be more aggressive. Well, it's not just that there's a lady brain and a guy brain, and the lady brain is just soft and squishy and the male brain is just built for dominance. That's not what we see. If you think about it, you've been socialized into these patterns of behavior. You've been socialized into what's appropriate to react, whether it's okay for you to cry when a sad scene happens on a movie, whether it's okay to assert yourself and be aggressive with your boss when you think you need a pay raise. And so a lot of these symptoms we see, such as, again, self-harm or substance abuse, a lot of the way we see these symptoms expressed differently by gender isn't because of an innate essential difference. It's because of socialization starting from childhood. We're all affected by gender. Gender affects our access to resources, life choices, and options. Gender influences the way that we relate to others. And so, do you feel safe in a group of another gender if you're the only person of that gender? And so if you are a college-aged woman, would you feel comfortable going out to a frat party or just any party if you're the only girl there? And if you would feel comfortable, would you at least ask yourself, I don't know, maybe I should bring a girlfriend? When you think of a person in your life who really gets it, is it a person of the same gender as you? Gender influences what people expect of us. So have you ever been told to man up or that something isn't ladylike? People ask you these questions because they have an expectation of you based off of how they perceive your gender, regardless of your identity. Gender influences subsequently what we expect of ourselves. And so if you're getting dressed for the weekend and you want to make sure that you look the part, how do you know that you look the part? You compare yourself to people of the same gender expression as you. And so if I want to know if I look the part of a seminar that I'm attending, I'm not going to compare myself to the 70-year-old white man who has tenure. I'm going to look around at the other early career sociologists who are women of color. And I'm going to compare myself to them. Whether it's healthy or unhealthy, we tend to compare ourselves to people who look like us. And we typically start that comparison with gender. Gender influences how we see the world. Does the world feel like a safe place to you? Under what circumstances does it feel safe to you? Who do we gravitate towards whenever we seek understanding? And then gender, as I mentioned earlier, also influences how we emote. And so is it acceptable for you as a masculine presenting person, as a man? I know those aren't the same thing, but they frequently overlap, but I know they're not the same thing. I was separating them intentionally. As a masculine presenting person, or as a male, or as a masculine presenting male, are you allowed to cry if a puppy does something cute on a reel? Or are you only really allowed to cry if like your mom passes away or something like that? I actually interview trans people, trans women, trans men, trans masc, trans femmes folk, and I interview them about their experiences gaining and losing male privilege during your transition. If you want to know more about it, ask me and we can talk about it. I mean, it's like, I love it. It's my research. And one of the things that one of the trans women said is, she can go to 7-Eleven and if her favorite soda is in stock, she could jump up and down and scream and cry, and people would think, oh my God, she's so adorable, she's so excited about her favorite drink. But if before she transitioned, when she was still masculine presenting and being perceived as male, she couldn't jump around and be excited over her slushy being available, that would be strange. And so even how you're allowed to express emotions, the degree which emotions you can express, how strongly you can express them, and the circumstances that you can express them in are going to vary widely by gender. Not because boys are born not being able to cry, not because girls are born with extra tear ducts. It's not that. You're socialized into the type of emotion you are allowed to feel. It's fascinating stuff. And so if I were to say women possess higher levels of emotional reliance and empathy, men are more independent in relationships. How do you think a sociologist would explain this gender difference? Now, you have enough information at this point to make some guesses. However, I will not grade you on whether you are necessarily right or wrong. Just make your best effort at answering this question. How do you think a sociologist would explain this? So, a sociologist would say this is the result of socialization and repeated ongoing differential treatment based on perceived gender. A sociologist would not say it's a brain thing or a chemical thing. A sociologist would say women have been socialized to focus on relationships. Men have been socialized to focus on the workplace and problem solving. And that's why we see these differences. And I'll talk more about those. So, debates over gender differences in mental health. I'm going to give you a few, and I mean like actually a couple to a few, 2 or 3, just early ideas of gender difference. One being a Freudian perspective, then we have the Chodorow perspective, and then we have the female superiority perspective. And then once I give you a few early ideas of how gender differences were thought of, then we'll talk about why we actually even see these gender differences to begin with. So Freud was one of the first to design a systematic theory comparing men's and women's mental health. It was bonkers. It was absolutely wild, absolutely wild. However, we can't not talk about Freud, because even though he did it wrong, he did it. He was one of the first people to say something's going on with gender here, and we have an obligation to figure out what it is. His attempts were wayward. I don't know when you know about Freud, but he was known to have hit the slopes quite a bit in his day. He was a bit erratic in his theorizing. However, we can't discount him, because we can discount his theory, but he has to be mentioned because he was one of the first to ever do this. And had Freud not said something's going on with gender here, we might not have the more credible theories that we have today. Freud basically said, flat out, that men are psychologically superior to women. The Oedipal complex is the idea that, boys are scared, castration anxiety. Boys are scared that their fathers will cut off their penises, and the boys are in love with their mothers. And you've probably heard jokes made about that. The female Oedipal complex is the Electra complex. And the Electra complex is the sense that little girls are in love with their dad. They view their moms as obstacles, and they grow to hate their moms. They resent their mom. They love their dad, and they're always envious of penises. So basically, women are raised from the very beginning to not like other women, to envy men, and to love men at the same time. They can never be them, and they always want to be around them. And I know you're like, why? Sounds a little crazy. If you think this is spot on, let's chat, because I think it'd be interesting. I would love to talk Freud with somebody who's a diehard Freud fan. I know somebody who has Freud's face smoking a cigar tattooed on her ass cheek. I'm not kidding. It's actually really funny if you think about it, because Freud had this thing about an oral fixation, but he would smoke cigars all the time. And Freud's thing with oral fixation is that people who smoke cigarettes, suck on pacifiers, or overeaters, Freud said they had an oral fixation because they didn't have proper, breastfeeding attachment as they were younger. And so Freud would talk about these people with oral fixations, yet he was always smoking cigars. And so I will say, the friend of mine who has the Freud tattoo on her butt cheek, it was done very ironically as a ha 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 ha, but she will talk Freud with you. She'll point out the good and the bad. So if you're somebody who's I don't know, Professor Beck is putting down Freud, let's talk about it. I'll always talk about Freud, but I'm going to assume that what I've explained about penis envy and castration envy, that most of you are probably on my side in terms of, I got a couple things wrong here, right? So his takeaway was that men are psychologically and just really emotionally overall superior to women, and women are kind of always operating in relation to men. Women are seen to be stunted in their ego, superego, but not in their id. I'm not going to quiz you on this. I'm not going to ask you a ton of questions. you might already, like, people who know Freud get excited about Freud. I mean, I'm kind of excited about Freud. Freud is fun. He's just a mess. But if you think of the id, the ego, and the superego, so think of that like the devil and the angel on your shoulder. The devil would be the id, and the superego would be the angel. And then in between, like the you of it all, would be the ego. And so Freud basically said that when it comes to the ego, so like the rational self, and the superego, the ideal self, women don't have that. But when it comes to that instant gratification, self-serving, childish devil on the shoulder, women have that. And so because women don't have a rational brain, because women can't formulate ideal thoughts, women basically live in their underdeveloped devil on their shoulder kind of mindset. And again, I'm not telling you this is true. I'm not getting behind this, but considering that Freud was one of the first people to say gender is something, there's something going on here with gender. And because his theories are so well known, like theories that say, we can all probably agree that who we date romantically, it has something to do with how we were parented, whether it's attachment theory, whether it's trying to avoid, trauma. We all do date in relation to our parents in some way or another, whether it's avoidance or attracting towards. That came out of Freud, the sense that our parents influence how we date later on, that how secure we feel as children impacts how secure we can feel with others. That comes from Freud. So it's worth mentioning, but the specifics of how this happens, why this happens, that's where we have to kind of break away from Freud. Freud's reasons for why girls are psychologically inferior is that the repression of active sexual impulses for the father results in passivity as a personality trait. The shift from the mother to father attachment involves turning aggression toward the self, resulting in masochism. Penis envy against boys predisposes, also a very transphobic theory, right? Penis envy towards disposes girls to jealousy and vanity. And because the boys have to overcome the Oedipal complex for their superego to develop. However, because girls don't have an Oedipal complex, they have the Electra complex, they never have the opportunity for that superego, for that angel on the shoulder to ever develop. So again, we can say like, oh, this is probably not it, but it's worth thinking about. And again, the idea that men are just naturally stronger and better and more rational, and women are just weaker and more nurturing and more emotional, even if we're not saying that people believe this theory, the belief that men are more rational and women are more emotional because of stunted growth, people still believe that. So the remnants of this theory are still very much influencing the way we understand gender today. So we can't just throw it away. Nancy Chodorow says it's a little bit different here. Yes, parenting is a thing, but actually it's about the mother, how close the mother keeps the child. That's why we see differences in mental health. So because women are mostly responsible for parenting, Chodorow says that mothers are responsible for the mental health of their children. So because mothers presume similarity between themselves and their daughters, they tend to keep their daughters close. They hold their daughters back from experiences to keep them close. And because mothers don't see themselves as being similar to their sons, they push their sons away into independence. So Chodorow's idea is that it's not that women are born more relationship oriented or that boys are born more independent, but that because mothers see more similarities in their daughters, they keep them close and they push their sons away because they see not as many similarities in them. Chodorow said that this different way of treating daughters and sons underlies the difference in development of the self, which is then reinforced by later socialization. Each gender then differs. They suffer from problematic extremes. So what we have then is that girls are more preoccupied with their relationships. The over-embeddedness, and the lack of a separation for girls leads to dependency on others. And on the other end, we see that boys experience problems with and fears of emotional connection. And so Chodorow says that the reason that we have the present family structure for boys and girls is that girls face ego boundary confusion, low self-esteem, and overwhelming relatedness to others. So the sense that girls don't really have a core sense of self because girls base themselves on on others, and that boys denial connection to others and are too independent. So there are also issues with this theory, but this one is a bit stronger than Freud because it says we're socializing them into this. Freud kind of just said, women are stunted, boys aren't. Chodorow said, well, mothers stunt their children in different ways. However, it still doesn't speak to, well, why do mothers perceive themselves as more similar? What is it about perceiving someone as similar that makes you keep them close, push them away, et cetera, et cetera? But again, worth mentioning because object relations theory is also one of the building blocks of the way that we currently understand gender differences in mental health. And then finally, we have female superiority models. Female superiority models are fun, but not the way. This is when, the argument that actually it'd be good to have a woman as the president because, women are more rational. And how many mass murderers have you seen that have been women? And how many school shooters have been women? That kind of reasoning of, well, maybe it's time to get a woman in there. Maybe the reason we have so many problems is because women need to be in there. It can be soothing to think this way, especially if you are a woman. It can be very soothing to say, actually, not only should we be equal, but women should be better. It's comforting, it's tempting, but in reality, it's still destructive. And so there are researchers who say, actually, the fact that men have less connection and are more independent is actually pathological. Maturity is all about relationships. And because of that, women have a superior psyche. Femininity is more about connectivity. Masculinity is about autonomy and separation. And so we actually should rely on women more. However, as fun as this might be, especially if you're a woman, to think about, these models of female superiority are also problematic. Because again, they're still setting up destructive hierarchies that men are better or women are better. And in reality, any hierarchy that says one is better than the other is going to have problems. So I wanted to explain that. We are going to take a beat and I'll be right back.